For decades now, farmers and ranchers have struggled to control the rising population of destructive and dangerous feral hogs.
There's a weapon that hunts wild hogs every single night, never asks for a paycheck, never takes a day off, and never loses interest. It costs the government nothing. It needs no funding, no maintenance crew, no helicopter fuel. Texas doesn't have it. Almost nobody outside of wildlife biology even knows it exists. And once you see what it's already doing on another continent, you'll wonder why nobody in Texas has seriously tried to bring it home. The scale of the problem. According to Texas Wildlife Services, the state is now home to roughly 2.6 million wild hogs, a number that has climbed sharply even compared to estimates from just a few years ago. They're no longer confined to a few counties. They're in nearly every one of them, from the fertile farmland of East Texas to the dry, rugged terrain of the West. Land that experts once assumed was too harsh for hogs to thrive in. They were wrong. This isn't an abstract wildlife statistic. It's money leaving farmers' pockets every single year. According to the Texas Farm Bureau and the American Farm Bureau Federation, Texas records $871 million in agricultural damage annually, the highest of any state surveyed in the country. Zoom out to the national picture, and the number climbs to somewhere between $1.5 and $1.6 billion a year, spread across a wild hog population, estimated at 5 to 6 million animals living in 35 to 38 states. The way they cause that damage is almost insultingly simple. Hogs have a powerful snout built for rooting through soil, digging up roots, grubs, and insects. In the process, they tear through a field of corn or peanuts like it's been hit by a plow with no plan and no mercy. By morning, a farmer can walk out to find what used to be a healthy crop turned into churned-up wasteland. Corn and peanuts take the worst of it, not because hogs prefer them, but because those are simply the crops most commonly planted across the land the hogs now occupy. Here's what makes this feel less like a wildlife problem and more like a losing war. Texas has no natural predator left that's capable of controlling hog numbers. Wolves and mountain lions, the two species that once filled that role, were pushed out of most agricultural regions by humans generations ago, hunted down to protect cattle and sheep. Texas A&M wildlife expert Billy Heigen-Botham put it in a line that's been repeated across the industry ever since. There are two kinds of landowners in Texas, those that have feral hogs and those that are going to have feral hogs. 4 weapons, 4 fatal flaws. So Texas farmers have thrown almost everything they have at the problem, and every single method comes with a fatal flaw: trenches. This is the oldest trick in the book, and it's grounded in real biology. Hogs have low, heavy bodies that aren't built to jump the way deer can. Dig a trench 3 to 5 feet deep around a field, and hogs can't cross it without a running start. But here's the catch. A trench doesn't kill a single hog. It doesn't touch the millions already living inside Texas's borders. All it does is redirect the damage onto whichever unlucky property doesn't have a trench of its own: fermented bait and remote-triggered traps. This is the most technically advanced method available. Farmers ferment corn with sugar and yeast for days until it gives off a stench that hogs find irresistible. Then they scatter it continuously for weeks. No trap set, no trigger pulled, just letting an entire sounder, piglets to the lead sow, get comfortable with the sight. Only once the whole group is inside does the gate drop, taking them all at once. The problem is patience. It takes weeks of camera monitoring, and if the trigger fires even a moment too early and a single hog escapes, the rest of the sounder learns the site is dangerous and never comes back. Helicopters and thermal scopes. This is the most expensive option, but also one of the most widely supported. A 2011 Texas A&M survey found 70% of Texas landowners were willing to allow helicopter hunting on their property. With military-grade thermal optics, hunters can spot a sounder glowing like neon against a pitch-black field from 400 yards out. It works fast, but it only works on the single ranch it's flown over on that single night. Against a population spread across an entire state in the millions, it barely makes a dent. Federal coordination. This is the most systematic effort ever mounted against feral hogs. The USDA's National Feral Swine Damage Management Program, launched in 2014, has removed more than 570,000 hogs, completely eliminated populations in 5 states, and helped 18 others reduce the severity of the problem. Between 2014 and 2021, It's estimated to have protected as much as $40.2 billion in agricultural and ecological value, the single largest success figure any hog control effort has ever posted. But it depends entirely on continued coordination between federal agencies, state governments, and thousands of individual landowners year after year. Cut the funding or break that coordination even briefly, and the hog population is fully capable of bouncing right back. 4 completely different strategies: physical, chemical, firepower, and large-scale coordination. Each one works to a point, but lined up side by side, they tell the same story. Not one of them, alone or combined, has ever been enough to actually beat the hogs. Texas has poured in money, technology, and manpower, and the hogs are still there. If you're starting to see the pattern here, that this isn't really a story about hogs, it's a story about something missing from the whole equation. Stick around, because the next part is where it gets interesting. And if you want more breakdowns like this one, this is a good moment to hit subscribe before we get into it. The breeding math. To understand why none of these approaches, no matter how expensive or sophisticated, can actually end the crisis, you have to look past the tools entirely and look at the math instead. A female wild hog can start reproducing at just 6 to 8 months old, an age when most large mammals haven't even left their mothers yet. Each year, she can produce 1 to 2 litters, 4 to 10 piglets per litter. On average, a single mature sow can add 8 to 12 new hogs to the population every single year. Under good conditions, plenty of food, low hunting pressure, a wild hog population can grow by as much as 80 to 86% annually. That's not pest-level reproduction. That's one of the fastest breeding rates of any large mammal in North America. Because of that math, wildlife management experts have landed on what's informally called the 70% rule. To keep a hog population from growing at all, you have to remove at least 70% of the total population every single year. Not 50%, not 60%, 70. Fall even slightly below that number, and the hogs that remain are more than capable of rebuilding the entire population within months. Apply that to Texas's 2.6 million hogs, and just to hold the number steady, not even reduce it, farmers and wildlife agencies would need to remove nearly 1.8 million hogs every single year, indefinitely, without a single year off. No single tool does that. Not trenches, not traps, not helicopters, not even the best funded federal program in the country's history. Not sustainably, not alone. And there's still that missing piece sitting underneath all of it. Nowhere in the modern United States is there a natural predator left that's built to do this job. Gray wolves and mountain lions were driven out of agricultural regions specifically to protect livestock, which means Texans have taken on the role of apex predator entirely by themselves, with guns, traps, and helicopters. A job that, in a balanced ecosystem, nature used to handle for free, every single night, with nobody supervising it at all. A bigger war. What does it look like when a country is fighting an even bigger version of this war, with far more hogs and far less land to work with? The answer is on a continent most people wouldn't guess: Australia. If Texas thinks its hog problem is bad, Australia's numbers are almost hard to believe. Estimates put the wild hog population there somewhere between 13.5 million and 24 million, several times the size of the entire US population combined. They occupy roughly 40 to 45% of the entire continent, from tropical wetlands in the north down to dry desert creek beds inland. The direct agricultural damage is estimated at more than 100 million Australian dollars a year. And according to Dr. Heather Channon, who coordinates Australia's National Feral Pig Management Program, that number is just the visible surface. It doesn't account for the environmental cost, the erosion, the polluted water holes, the native wildlife displaced as hogs root through wetlands and riverbanks that took centuries to form. A separate, long-term study tracking cumulative damage since 1960 puts the real figure somewhere between $730 million and $9.54 billion US dollars, depending on what's counted. And just like in Texas, Australia's hog population can grow 85 to 86% a year if left unchecked, practically identical to the US growth rate, which means the same brutal math applies on both continents. The two stories even share the same origin. Australia's wild hogs are descended from domestic pigs brought over on the First Fleet in 1788 as a food source for the new colony at Sydney. America's wild hogs trace back to Spanish expeditions in the 15th and 16th centuries. Both are the descendants of abandoned livestock that eventually became some of the most destructive invasive species humans have ever accidentally unleashed. And Australian farmers aren't getting an easier fight either. They still lay bait, build large silo traps, and hire helicopter shooters to cover land that's often impossible to reach by road. There's no magic bullet exempting them from any of it, but there's one quiet difference at play in Australia that Texas simply doesn't have, an ecological link that's been missing from the American fight for centuries. Nature's free predator. That creature is the dingo, Australia's largest land-dwelling carnivorous mammal, and across most of its range, the undisputed apex predator. Nothing above it, nothing hunting it back. And that position is exactly what makes the dingo one of nature's most effective ecological regulators, helping keep kangaroo numbers in check, while also suppressing invasive species like wild hogs and feral rabbits. The way dingoes hunt hogs doesn't look like the dramatic takedown most people imagine. Dingoes are opportunistic. They go after whatever's easiest to catch. In areas where kangaroos and hogs are both plentiful, dingoes generally target those two over livestock, which tends to be more closely guarded by humans. Their preferred targets are piglets and juveniles, young, not yet strong enough to defend themselves. A full-grown boar with sharp tusks is genuinely dangerous, even for a lone dingo. Because of that, dingoes usually hunt solo or in pairs against smaller prey, but will form packs of anywhere from 2 to 12 animals when the target is too large for one hunter to handle alone. Inside a pack, coordination matters more than raw strength. Some dingoes flank, others drive the target forward, working the way a well-trained team would, rather than a chaotic free-for-all. Most hunting happens at dawn, dusk, or overnight, when both predator and prey are most active. Footage released by the Australian Wildlife Conservancy, recorded in a remote stretch near the Gulf of Carpentaria in the Northern Territory, captured exactly this kind of hunt. And according to the organization, it was the first time this specific behavior had ever been filmed this clearly. A single dingo trailed an entire group of hogs across open grassland, completely unbothered by being outnumbered. It didn't chase the biggest or the closest hog. It patiently isolated the smallest, weakest one in the group, and brought it down alone with zero human involvement. But the single hunt isn't really the point. The real story is what's happening behind it, every night, across the entire continent. Dingoes don't try to wipe out hog populations the way humans do. There's no campaign, no quota, no annual target to hit. Instead, they apply constant pressure on piglet survival, which happens to be exactly the variable driving that terrifying 85% annual growth rate. Every piglet a dingo catches is one hog that will never reach breeding age, never reproduce, never add to next year's numbers. And this pressure costs nothing. No government budget, no equipment, no one monitoring trail cameras at 2 a.m. It just happens, every night, across the whole continent, for free. The clearest proof of just how much this matters comes from Australia's own history. Between 1880 and 1885, in an effort to protect sheep grazing land from dingo attacks, Australians built the dingo fence, the longest structure of its kind anywhere in the world, stretching roughly 3,488 miles across the continent. Inside the fence, where dingoes were nearly wiped out to protect livestock, ecologists documented an unintended consequence. Feral cats and foxes, two other introduced predators, exploded in number with no dingoes left to keep them in check. Kangaroo populations surged too, leading to overgrazing and land degradation. Outside the fence, where dingoes remained part of the ecosystem, cats, foxes, and kangaroos all stayed at far more balanced levels. In other words, Australia ran a real-world, unintentional experiment spanning more than a century, and it proved something no piece of Texas technology ever has. A native apex predator's role simply cannot be replicated by guns, electronic traps, or thermal scopes. There's no substitute. Why not just import one? Given all that, why hasn't anyone just shipped a few dingoes over to Texas and let nature handle the rest? Because doing that would likely trade one disaster for another. First, the dingo is itself an introduced species, believed to have arrived in Australia somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 years ago, possibly earlier. Ecological history is full of examples of a species being moved to a new continent with the best of intentions, only to spiral into a fresh catastrophe. The textbook case is the cane toad, brought to Australia specifically to control beetles damaging sugarcane, and which went on to become one of the most destructive invasive species in the country's history. Second, and this is the bigger issue, dingoes don't just hunt hogs, they hunt sheep, goats, and young calves too. That's the entire reason Australians built a 3,400-mile fence in the first place. Not to keep hogs out, but to keep dingoes away from sheep flocks. Texas has one of the largest cattle, sheep, and goat industries in the country. Introducing dingoes could easily mean solving one expensive problem by creating an even more expensive one. Third is the legal wall. U.S. federal law around importing exotic wildlife is already extremely strict, shaped by decades of costly lessons from other introduced species that spiraled out of control after being brought in, legally or otherwise. And finally, there's a deeper ecological problem. Dingoes took thousands of years to adapt to Australia's specific climate, terrain, and prey. There's no guarantee they'd behave the same way in Texas, with a different climate, different vegetation, and different prey entirely. So, what's the actual solution for Texas? It's probably not importing an animal wholesale from another continent. A more realistic path might be looking at America's own history instead. The long-debated, deeply controversial idea of controlled restoration of native predators like gray wolves or mountain lions. A conversation that comes with just as much conflict of its own. Put side by side, Texas and Australia are fighting the same war with the same tools and getting the same result. Costly, ongoing, and never quite finished. Except Australia has one extra layer of defense working for free every night, and Texas has none. That absence is the real weapon in this story. And it's not a piece of hardware Texas is missing. It's a predator, something that evolved alongside this land, that no thermal scope or federal budget can substitute for. When a link like that gets removed from an ecosystem, the cost doesn't disappear. It just changes shape. From a quiet evening of a wolf out on the plains into hundreds of millions of dollars spent every year trying to redo that same job with machines instead. From the cornfields of Texas torn up overnight to a fence stretching 3,400 miles across Australia, this was never really a story about hogs at all. It's a story about what happens when the balance a landscape ran on for thousands of years gets stripped away, and humans are left standing in for a job nature used to do for free. Every trench dug, every trap baited, every helicopter fueled up for another night flight is, in a sense, a small monument to that missing predator. Proof of how much work it takes to replace something an ecosystem once did on its own. So, what about you? If it were your call to make, would you keep pouring money into technology year after year? Or take the risk of bringing back a natural predator that's been gone for generations? Let me know in the comments. Thanks so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this one, hit like and subscribe to World Enigma. It genuinely helps me keep making videos like this. See you in the next one.